I remember the sensation before the rage spoke, not the story, the body. A heat at the base of my throat, a tight band across my chest like a strap being pulled, my jaw clenching without permission. In that moment, I was flooding. And what scared me wasn't that anger existed. Anger is human. What scared me was how convinced I felt that the anger was righteous, inevitable, even sacred. Like the labyrinth itself had handed me a sword and said, finally, use it. And the discipline was simply noticing the urge to act, watching my mind build a case against whoever happened to be in front of me at that time. That's where the myth of St. George and the Dragon mirrors me, not as medieval painting, as a psychology lesson. The dragon is not a stranger outside the village. It's the force inside me that wants to burn down the whole village to feel clean again. St. George doesn't win by pretending the dragon isn't real. He wins by meeting it close enough to be harmed, but steady enough not to become it. In hindsight, psychology might call this a collision with the shadow. The parts of me I denied while trying to be disciplined, be spiritual, and be good. Denial doesn't delete energy, it stores it. Then it leaks out as moral performance. Rage dressed as truth. Rage demanding an audience. It also carries a darker social temptation. The need to make someone else carry the rejected material. To project the shadow outward and call that justice. Meaningful suffering can intensify that temptation. Horror starts looking like liberation, but the second I romanticize the heat, I am already in danger. So I did the smallest, least glamorous thing. I turned to the thread, checking sleep, checking diet, checking my grounding practices, reminding myself of the sacred law, meaning never cancels consequence. If I act from this heat, there will be fallout, legal, relational, bodily. I needed accountability, not a myth. I needed to regulate before I spoke. I needed to choose the next action like I was a man who has to live with that decision tomorrow. The second chamber was quieter and in some ways more humiliating. It was a habit that kept offering me a shortcut out of discomfort. And I watched my mind do what it always tried to do. Turn the habit into a symbol. Make it part of a grand mythic story. Give it a poetic costume so I wouldn't have to call it what it was. Something that pulled me away from my own life. I could feel the bargaining in my body. But that's not spirituality. That's a nervous system begging for regulation. The older archive around substances is useful precisely because it is double-edged. Human beings have long used psychoactive substances in ritual contexts, for visioning, for work, for ordeals, for trauma, for devotion. Things like soma, ayahuasca, different ethnogens, sacramental cannabis, bhang in Hinduism and Shaivite traditions. These belong to a real, verifiable history. But that history does not bless compulsion. It warns about it. Substances can open perception beyond the linear mind. They can also teach the system to outsource regulation to escape. That's why the myth of Fafnir lands here. In the old tale, greed doesn't arrive as a monster. It begins as a man, and then the craving reshapes him until he becomes the thing he protects. A dragon curled around a hoard, guarding the very poison that made him. The hoard looks like safety. It's actually a prison. Psychology might call it reinforcement, a loop, relief, then consequence. More relief, then continued consequence. And the deeper danger is that the loop teaches the nervous system a lie. That regulation comes from escape. But escape is expensive. It costs sleep. It costs clarity. It costs relationships. It costs trust. It can cost the law, the body, and community. Even where substances can carry ritual or symbolic meaning, they become dangerous the moment I use that meaning to hide from plain truth. So the practice I return to is never a mystical one. It is a practical one. It's a responsible one, and it's an accountable one. I stopped mythologizing my habits and addictions. I named it as behavior that has outcomes. And I asked, what is the consequence if I keep feeding this? And I asked, what do I owe the people around me? I didn't negotiate with the dragon in my head. I returned to the basics. Sometimes the bravest and most heroic thing is making the next hour boring on purpose. The thread isn't glamorous. The thread is survival, and survival is the first act of integrity. Then fear arrived, the kind that makes your senses sharpen, your eyes dart, and your imagination sprint ahead, inventing disasters as if it's doing you a favor. My stomach went hollow. My skin felt too thin. I could feel my thoughts trying to command my body. Run and hide and control everything. Prove you're safe. Fear turns neutral data into a courtroom, into a nightmare. In the mythic mirror, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, holds a paradox I needed. Serpent as instinct, power, life energy, feather as wisdom, vision, and perspective. The lesson isn't kill the serpent. The lesson is don't let raw instinct become your whole identity. Let it rise, learn its message, then guide it with something higher than panic. The body knows what the danger feels like before the intellect can make philosophy from it. And once the system has brushed that edge, your relationship to risk, control, and purpose changes. That can deepen a person. It can also distort them. Psychology might call this exposure with containment. Fear is information, not instruction. It points to vulnerability. It points to what matters. But if I treat fear as commander, like I have done many a time, it becomes a total tyrant. If I treat it as a messenger, I can stay in relationship with my own nervous system without handing it the keys. So I practice containment in the simplest ways. Longer exhales. I put one hand on my chest and felt the rhythm. Sometimes I even lied down and just checked in with myself. If I act from fear, I might do something reckless. Undeniably, the serpent can carry medicine, but only if I keep the feather, perspective, discipline, and the thread alive in my hands. And slowly another truth began to emerge. I was not afraid of death in exactly the same old way anymore. But that did not make me free either. It made me more responsible for how I carried fear into action. The fourth chamber was a sentence I couldn't unsay once it formed. Not an explosive sentence, just clean and sharp. Some actions are simply destructive. That was it. No special meaning, no initiation poetry, no loophole. Just an unromantic truth that had cut through everything I'd been using to protect my self-image. And I felt it land in my body like a weight dropping into place. A strange quiet after the arguing. The kind of quiet that isn't peace yet, but is real. The mythic mirror here is the Kurukshetra battlefield. The inner war. Not a story about winning with purity, but about facing moral complexity without collapsing into denial. Arjuna doesn't get to pretend like the battle isn't happening. He has to see the whole field, including his own contradictions. The Mahabharata matters for that reason. It treats conflict as both an outer event and inner structure. The war is also a map of the psyche. In hindsight, psychology might call this the beginning of shadow integration. Not just observing impulses, but taking responsibility for what they would do in the world. Earlier on, awareness helped me watch thoughts without drowning in them. But now, here, awareness wasn't enough. I needed a vow. I will not use meaning to excuse harm. I will not mythologize damage. I will not turn my suffering into authority without accepting responsibility for what that suffering has made me capable of. That sentence changed everything, because the danger of romanticizing madness or initiation is not only philosophical, it is practical. It gives people ways to avoid clean truth. So I brought law and support into the frame. I asked, what boundaries keep me and others safe? What systems exist for accountability? Sleep is high up there, because if not, the battlefield becomes chaotic. The body is a compass, because when I'm dysregulated, I lie to myself. Somewhere within all of this complexity, I imagine too, what an environment would look like that could actually hold a person through this kind of crisis without either sentimentalizing everything or just flattening it out. A place of support and consequence and honesty. So I had to again return to the thread, not as philosophy, but as a contract. Eat, rest, sleep, tell the truth, accept limits. If there's repair to make it. If there is a line not to cross, then don't cross it. The battlefield doesn't end when you have insight. It ends when you choose responsibility repeatedly in ordinary time. Integration arrived like a schedule, like a quiet moment of doing the next right thing when nobody was watching or nobody cared. I began treating practices as non-negotiable thread, not mood-based rituals. If the labyrinth was going to keep presenting monsters, then my job was to keep building a floor strong enough to stand upon. That meant small physical acts, making the bed, washing up, stepping outside for air, sitting in the sauna, letting my nervous system learn consistency again. It meant building days that could hold me, even when my mind was loud, even when the floor would fall out from beneath my feet. The mythic mirror is the Minotaur faced, not worshipped. The Minotaur is what happens when a chain of human decisions is hidden away and fed in secret. You can build a maze to contain it, but if you keep feeding it, it grows. Facing it means bringing the hidden pattern into the light and changing the inputs, one choice at a time. Another set of images helped me too. The phoenix dying in the flame and rising in another form. Chiron, the wounded healer whose injury becomes authority only when it is lived honestly. Those myths matter only if they stay practical. Otherwise, they are just prettier disguises for self-importance. In hindsight, psychology might call this reintegration mechanics. Layers of behavioral change and routine and community scaffolding. Not a single breakthrough. Rather, repetition that retrains the nervous system from the very foundation. Sleep becomes a cornerstone, not an afterthought. Food and movement and sunlight, once boring things, become sacred, and discipline stops being a performance and becomes a form of self-care. I also made a space for consequence. If relationships were strained, I didn't rewrite the story to look noble. I stayed accountable. If the law or institutions had lines, I respected them. If someone needed distance, I didn't chase. Community is not an audience, it's a reality check. Gratitude began to matter too, not as sentiment, but as a ritual orientation, honoring what kept me alive, mapping the turning points honestly. Remembering the thread was never a climactic moment, just a faithful practice. So when I say meeting the inner dragon, I don't mean conquering myself with force or with violence. I mean seeing what I am capable of, without flinching, and then choosing again and again and again to live like the thread matters, because it does. The spiral only becomes sacred when it's grounded in responsibility, one day at a time, again and again.